Hello fellow crochet lovers, and welcome to another holiday themed video. This video is coming a little later than I had originally intended, and if you follow my Instagram account, you probably have a really good idea as to why. A few weeks ago, we welcomed little Cosmo into our family, and it's been a little bit of a learning curve trying to juggle content creation with puppy training, especially because this little guy loves yarn, and one of his favorite activities is stealing my yarn and my crochet project. I can't even blame him. I love yarn too, but it's definitely made it hard for me to create while he's awake. He was literally on my lap as I was writing this, and he's on my lap right now as I record. But hey, I'm here, you're here, apparently Cosmo's here. Let's take a look at these 4 adorable and easy holiday garlands you can crochet to decorate your space with this holiday season. Today we're going to be looking at the Festive Crochet Christmas Garland by Maggie of Zamiguz, the Festive Grannies Crochet Garland by Jennifer from Flux, the Christmas Star Garland by Sara from My Merry Messy Life, and lastly, the Mini Stocking Banner by Lion Brand on Joann. These garlands all differ quite greatly, but one thing they have in common, aside from being cute, easy, and free, is that they're all made with number 4 worsted weight yarn. These garlands don't have a specified skill level on their pattern website, but in my opinion, they're all quite simple to make, and I recommend you try them out, even if you're not terribly confident in your crochet skills yet. At the time of filming, these patterns were all free on the websites linked below. Just a little side note here, apparently my channel is too new and too small to allow me to put links in my description box or to allow me to pin comments, so I'll have credits to the pattern creators in the description box below, and I'll leave a comment below with the actual links, but unfortunately I can't pin it, so hopefully it's still easy enough for everybody to find. Let's get started with our first pattern. This garland was designed by Maggie of Zamiguz. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's the Festive Crochet Christmas Garland, which looks like a giant Christmas light bulb garland. The bulbs are made using worsted weight yarn and a 3.5mm hook. I have used a mix of colors for the light bulbs, including the shamrock green, poppy red, white, and golden wheat. I also used an Oxford gray for the base caps. I wanted to use colors that were on a bit of a Christmas theme, but also these were the colors that I had that looked the best together. I originally wanted to include a blue, but all of my blues were too deep or too washed out, and I was going for more of a vibrant but not dark vibe. The original pattern mentions the importance of the type of yarn used, and I can confirm that while it's all made with worsted weight yarn, if you use a heavier yarn, you get a bigger bulb. For example, the red bulb was made with a worsted yarn that works up like a DK yarn, and the green bulb was made with a worsted yarn that feels thicker and works up how you'd expect a worsted yarn to work up. The difference isn't so great that I think it's not worth making if all you've got is the thicker worsted yarn, but it's still a bit noticeable, so be sure to choose your yarn carefully and account for the difference when you're deciding how many bulbs you want to make or how you're going to want to display them. Each bulb took me about 30 minutes to make, which isn't too bad depending on how many bulbs you're going to want on your garland. I made 4 bulbs because I didn't want to struggle to find a place to put them up well enough to take some footage for this video, but you may want more or less depending on where you're planning to put them. An important thing to note when you're deciding how many bulbs to make is the space between each light. The pattern recommends a chain 30 between the lights, but they also include some bells between the lights. I didn't have bells, so I didn't do this part, but it's something to consider when deciding how many bulbs you're going to want to make and how big you want your garland to be. The pattern itself is perfectly written and easy to follow. The light bulbs are made using the ragdoll technique, so it'll require making 2 panels in the same color and joining them with a single crochet. This gives the lights a 2D effect, almost cartoonish in my opinion. I think this works really great with the pattern and the vibe of this garland. The pattern uses the single crochet stitch exclusively and also uses the single crochet increase and the single crochet decrease technique. So it's super easy to follow even if you're just starting out with crochet. If I were to make this garland again, I think I'd put the bulbs even closer. They're a bit heavy, so gravity does its thing and pushes them downwards a bit, making the garland itself a little saggy if you're only securing it from the ends. If you're putting this on your tree, the recommended chains are probably perfectly fine because it keeps the bulbs a little more separated so you can fit all your beautiful little ornaments around them without any problems. Overall, this garland is adorable and super easy to make. It's completely customizable. You can even embroider something on the lights themselves. You can change up the colors. You can make the outer single crochet stitches in black to solidify that cartoon look. They're just great. I think there's a lot you can do with them, and if they match your vibe, I highly recommend them. Let's move on to our next pattern. The next garland we're going to take a look at was designed by Jennifer from Flux, and it's the Festive Grannies Garland. This garland looks like tiny slanted granny squares with beads and tassels to match. The granny squares are made with a 5mm hook, and the colors are completely customizable, of course, but I used a poppy red, a shamrock green, and an antique white. When I first found this pattern, I couldn't believe how simple and elegant these tiny little granny squares were. I wanted to make the exact pattern and get that exact same final product, and I knew I had the colors to replicate it exactly. Except my green is a little darker, but that's okay. This garland was a whole vibe, and I wasn't going to be missing out on any of it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find the wood beads, so I used white plastic ones. You know, the type we used to buy when we were kids to make jewelry with, the ones you can find literally anywhere? Yeah, I used those. This pattern is mainly made up of double crochet stitches and chains, as most granny style squares are. It's super simple and super gorgeous. It's written really well, and at no point did I find myself confused as to which part I was at, as the pattern is perfectly labeled. I had never made a single granny square or any tassels before trying this pattern, and I still had no trouble understanding any of it or following the instructions. This pattern is great no matter what your level of crochet is. And I know what you're thinking. How did I get this far into crochet without making any granny squares? Well, they just never came up organically, and I didn't want to force myself to make a certain pattern because other people consider it a basic thing to learn when you're starting out. I prefer to make patterns that speak to me, and that's my motivation for all the patterns I show on this channel. Back to the squares, each square took me about 20 minutes to make, including making and attaching the tassels and beads. However, this pattern might be a little bit more time consuming if you feel like you have to block your squares. But I didn't do any blocking. I didn't think it was needed, so I left them as is. And as you can see in the footage here, it really doesn't curl into itself too much in my opinion, so I think blocking is completely optional. The original pattern also doesn't mention blocking, so it might not be something that's really considered for granny squares this small, but I know a lot of people think blocking is absolutely necessary for any project that has granny squares, so I figured it was worth mentioning. I think the blocking debate also depends on your personal crocheting style. If you crochet looser, you'll most likely be fine with this pattern, but if you feel like your crochet is tight and your corners start to fold into themselves, it might be worth it to block them just to make sure their adorable pattern is visible at all times. Overall, if you're looking for a garland to fill up a space you've got available and you don't have a lot of time before Christmas, because realistically we're just 14 days away at this point, I think this pattern is great. It's quick and simple, and the end result is stunning. I showed it to my mother-in-law when I finished and she absolutely adored it. I might even gift it to her. And even if you don't need any new garlands for this holiday season, I recommend bookmarking this pattern for next year because it's an absolute keeper. Let's continue to the next garland pattern. This garland was designed by Sara from My Merry Messy Life, and it's the Christmas Star Garland. It's a bit of an oldie, having been published in 2012, but one that I still think is worth taking a look at and considering for your holiday decor. This garland is almost like the one we did previously, as the stitching is quite similar, but it shapes out like a star instead of the square we saw before. This pattern uses a 5mm hook and a combination of the single crochet, the half double crochet, the double crochet, and even the triple crochet stitch. So we're not leaving anything behind here. We've got all the stitches we can possibly include in this pattern. We also use the picot stitch on the final round of the star, but the pattern walks us through this perfectly. The pattern starts out with chains that you'll need to slip stitch together, but I decided to substitute that with a magic ring or magic circle because it feels more natural and also feels a lot easier to control in terms of closing off that circle later on. Each star took me about 45 minutes, so this pattern can be a little time consuming if you want a lot of stars on your garland. It's also important to note that this pattern may actually require blocking. In the last pattern, blocking was completely optional because the squares were really small and in my experience didn't curl into themselves, but no matter what I did to these stars, they curled up. I tried laying them down flat, I tried flattening them out with my hands, I kept my tension loose, but it honestly does not matter. They curl. I did my best to straighten them out a little bit while I was taking footage for this video, but even then, you can see that some of them just wanted to curl right back up. The original designer mentions in a Facebook comment on her page that she did have to block them because she also noticed that they were curling into themselves. So that's something to keep in mind when you're deciding to make this garland and you're trying to map out how long it's going to take you. That said, I didn't block mine. I considered it, but I really wanted to see if the curling effect was that bad or if it was something that we could work with. I also made the stars in different colors. The original design had the stars with a red center and a green outer border. I did those, but I also wanted to see what they would look like with a green center and a red outer border. The colors are always completely customizable in any pattern, of course, and while I try to keep the patterns as close to the original as I can to show off what their original design looked like, I also wanted to try a little variation on the color scheme. I feel like this pattern and design was intended to look like the stitches were a little puffy. When you look at the pictures on the website, they look like the stitches puff out of the star, but I didn't find this to be the case when I made them, unless I made my tension really tight, but that just didn't feel right to me, so I didn't do it. If the intention of the designer was to have the stitches be puffy, I feel like a different stitch or method could have been used. I know the pattern would have to be completely rewritten because as it stands, it wouldn't work, but I think this pattern would look absolutely stunning if it had used a puff stitch or a bobble stitch instead of the cluster of double crochet and triple crochet stitches. Overall, this pattern is still really cute and easy to follow. I didn't block my stars, so I feel like I'm not getting the full effect, but I think it looks great and can only get better with a little TLC. I think the stars are spaced out perfectly on the garland and they make a great decor item. Let's move on to our last and final garland. The last garland we're going to take a look at was designed by Lion Brand for Joann, and it's a mini stocking garland. It just looks like a bunch of little socks on a garland cord. It's so straightforward, I don't even think I needed to say that. The original pattern was made and written with tinsel yarn, but I used regular worsted yarn because I didn't have any tinsel yarn, and honestly, I didn't feel the need to go out and buy some. The pattern uses a 5mm hook, which seems to be a popular choice for today's garlands. This pattern is also exclusively single crochet stitches, which is great for everyone, and it uses the single crochet two together technique as well. Each little stocking took me about 30 minutes, which isn't a bad amount of time depending on how many little stockings you want to have on your garland. I went into super ambitious mode and made 10 tiny stockings. I wanted to showcase all the different color options when you're using this pattern, from solid colors to 2 colors, and lastly the original 3 colors with alternating rows. This pattern can do it all. Just make sure to follow the instructions properly, even if it's all made in one color. The stockings are easy and straightforward to make, and although I personally prefer to flip them inside out because I like the harder stitching look, you don't have to. If you're going to be doing the striped pattern, however, you will have a side that doesn't look as good as the other because the rows are continuous, so it never gives us that nice finished look by closing off the line with a join. I considered making a stocking with rows that are joined with a slip stitch to show you what they could possibly look like, but I wanted to stick to the original pattern and leave that for another time, maybe next Christmas. The garland cord itself is a little hard to work with when using the regular worsted yarn, and I don't know if it would have been any easier using the tinsel yarn, but making a chain using 3 strands of worsted yarn was a little complicated to start, but it quickly became easier as I got used to the denseness and the weight of it. The hanging loops on the stockings did feel a little big for my liking, as they were a chain of 14, so I think if I make this pattern again, I'll probably try a chain of 10. The garland cord did look amazing though, so I highly recommend using all the colors you worked with. Overall, this pattern is definitely time consuming, but it's just so beautiful. I don't even mind, and I think you might not either. I highly recommend it for literally any space that you feel could have a little extra pop of color and festive goodness. The pattern itself is written well and works up beautifully. And with that, we've reached the end of this garland video. Thank you for still being here, and thanks for coming over to my video to check out these cute and easy garlands I picked. Don't forget to let me know which garland was your favorite. Was it the light bulb garland, the granny square garland, the Christmas star garland, or was it the mini stocking garland? Or do you have a favorite go-to garland that I didn't cover? I'd love to hear all about it and add that pattern to my collection. We all know how YouTube works. Do all the things if you want to, check out my social media if you're interested, and if not, hey, I'm still glad you stopped by and made it this far. You're awesome. Check back soon for my next video where we're going to be looking at some cute Christmas ornaments to add to your tree. You know, just in case you've got an empty spot you gotta fill real quick before people come over, or in case you're already hunting down some free patterns for next year. I look forward to seeing you there. Happy holidays and happy crocheting!